with the talk Reconciling the Effect of Frequency on Semantic Extension in Language Acquisition and Language Change.
Thank you. So this talk focuses on how accessibility-driven form choice in production provides a possible explanation for semantic change. Our research is inspired by a tool analogy from Zip that he conceived of the lexicon as a artisan's workbench. And so tools that are frequently used by the artisan are placed closer to him. This not only makes those tools more accessible and easier for future use, but it's also more likely that they're recruited for new uses that and as a result become more versatile. Zip used this analogy to explain why frequent forms have more meanings. The idea is that frequent forms are more accessible and as a result are more likely to be extended to new uses. This finding by Zip has been replicated by Piontelossi and colleagues who show that frequent forms are more likely to have more than one meaning. Diachronically, this process of extending frequent form to new function has been proposed to be an important sub-process in the process of grammaticalization. For example, the form going to that has changed to express the meaning of future. This functional broadening has been argued to result from an increase in the frequency of the forms. Let's think about two alternative verbs that could have been extended to express the meaning of future. One is going to, the other is running to. So an explanation here would be that going to is extending because it has a higher frequency. However, this is a correlation that has been captured, and this correlation does not show or prove that frequency causes semantic extension. Indeed, we have somewhat an opposite pattern that we see as a result of frequency, where frequency results in entrenchment. A study by Shu and Tannenbaum, they provide evidence on their research on the acquisition of lexical semantics and novel word learning. They show that the form that's frequently used with a meaning becomes restricted to that meaning. They call this the suspicious coincidence effect. This effect is very similar to the entrenchment effect proposed by Brain and Brooks. This is, again, a lot of evidence from verb argument structure studies. So Brain and Brooks show that a verb that's frequently used in a particular construction is less likely to be used with a new construction compared to a rare verb. So that's the opposite of the frequency causing extension effect. Brooks and colleagues show that 3-year-olds were more likely to produce overgeneralization with low-frequency English verbs than high-frequency verbs. For example, they were more likely to say he arrived me to school than he came me to school. This is also shown in the grammaticality judgment studies by Ambridge and colleague in at least a few studies and by Easton. Several researchers in child language acquisition have noticed a similar pattern when they were examining comprehension and production in children. For example, in comprehension, they found that the child knows that a cow is not a kitty, but in production, the child, due to lack of access to cow, extends the word kitty to express cow. Basically, the closest semantically word will do if you don't have access to the word that is ideally used for that meaning. Okay. So what are we doing in this study? We ask if we boost the frequency of a construction, would the frequent form become restricted to the meaning that it was originally paired with? So in other words, do we get entrenchment, or would it become more available for use with related and novel meaning? In other words, do we get extension? We're going to try to establish a direction of causality from frequency to extension, so that's the goal. We will document the perception production dissociation that I just talked about in child language acquisition data, and we examine the condition under which it arises. The last contribution, we propose to use the 2AFC task as a way to level accessibility and compare that to production to see how accessibility is functioning in production. Okay, so our experiment is artificial language learning experiment. We have 2 languages. Each participant is presented to one of the 2 languages. 2 meanings are expressed during exposure. One is plural non-diminutive, the other one is diminutive non-plural, singular. 2 suffixes, sil and don, express the meaning of plural. 2 suffixes, nem and shun, express the meaning of diminutive. When I'm reporting the results later in the talk, I will only focus on don and nem, and I'll tell you why that is. The 2 languages differ in the identity of the frequent suffixes. Of course, frequency is the manipulation here. So in language don has a high frequency by a factor of 4. In language nem has a high frequency by a factor of 4. All other suffixes have equal frequencies. The crucial thing here is that during tests, we are presenting the learners with plural diminutive. So that's the novel but related meaning that we are testing them on. Okay. So we have 70 adult speakers of American English, 35 are exposed to don, 35 are exposed to nem. Our simile is a 420 trial experiment. Starts with exposure, then exposure is followed by an elicited production task. After the elicited production, we have a 2AFC form choice task. It's basically mapping a meaning onto one of 2 forms. So you see here that the direction of processing is from meaning to form, which is why we're comparing it to production. We have a comprehension task that is the last task in the experiment. It's basically mapping a form onto one of 4 meanings. Okay. So the first task, in production, they see a creature, and the creature name is, they hear the name of the creature. Then the 4 meanings are provided to the learners. 3 disappear, 1 remains, and the task of the participant is to express that meaning using the suffixes, one of the 4 suffixes. What is our prediction here? Based on Zipf's analogy, again, frequency causing accessibility differences and frequent forms being more accessible, we predict that frequent form in each condition would be extended or would be produced in response to the diminutive plural. I would just call this dimple. When participants are producing a form for dimple, they would use the frequent forms in each language to express that. Okay, and here are our results. I'm going to introduce you to our significats, that's what we call them. Either me or Bolia talk, we always use this. They tell you where to look, that's the important part. They're bar-hopping cats. So on the x-axis, you'll see that the 3 meanings, this is collapsed across the 2 conditions. The novel meaning is, of course, the dimple meaning that I'm going to focus on. The original meaning is the meaning that the suffix was paired with during exposure. The wrong meaning is the meaning that the suffix was not paired with during exposure. The x-axis is the probability of producing a form. So what are the 2 forms? Frequent and infrequent. The frequent form, so both of these forms are don and nem, only the forms that were involved in the manipulation. Frequent means don in don, nem in nem. So when these suffixes were frequent. Infrequent means, again, don in nem, nem in don. So same suffixes, just different conditions. And as you can see, when these suffixes are frequent, they're more likely to be produced in response to dimple. So our prediction is borne out. Okay. The next task, 2AFC, form choice task. Here, the participants see the creature, same as production. Again, the meaning is provided. The stem is provided. And then they ask first word or second word. They hear 2 words using one of these 2 suffixes. Zutidon or zutinem, for example, and they use the button press to say which word was better. Our prediction here is that we will not see an effect frequency, because if we attribute the effect frequency to basically accessibility mediating this frequency in production, when we level accessibility, we should not see an effective frequency. And that is exactly what we find. There is no preference for choosing one of these two suffixes to express the meaning of dipole. The last task, comprehension. In comprehension, they hear a word like zutidon, one of these suffixes attached to a stem, and they are supposed to click on one of the four meanings. So here, this is a little, looks messy, but I'm going to try to explain it. We expect entrenchment in comprehension based on the studies that I discussed, and also we think what we expect to happen is that the participants start thinking that dawn means plural in general. But as they are exposed more and more, so again, when they're frequently exposed to dawn, pairing with the plural non-diminutive, the meaning becomes a little more specific. And so they move from just thinking that dawn means plural to meaning that it means plural diminutive. And the same thing happens with nem. They start off thinking that it is diminutive, and they move more and more towards thinking that it is a non-plural diminutive. So the meanings become more specific. I guess going back to Schuh and Tannenbaum's study, we could think of just plural and just diminutive as these basic categories, and we could think of plural non-diminutive and diminutive non-plural as more subordinate categories. And so when entrenchment occurs, you go from a basic category to a more subordinate kind of meaning. That is exactly what we find. As you can see, looking at the novel meaning, so the y-axis here is the probability of selecting a meaning. So they're clicking on one of the four meanings. When forms are frequent, they're less likely to be mapped onto the novel meaning, and more likely to stick to their original meaning. So entrenchment occurs in comprehension. Sorry. So I'm going to quickly go over what the findings of the three tasks. So in the form to meaning mapping, which is approximation of comprehension for us, is we find that entrenchment of the frequent form occurs. So the form becomes strengthened in its original meaning, and that prevents it from being extended to the novel meaning. So the idea here is that the more learners experience a form with a certain meaning, the more they become confident that form is restricted to expressing that meaning. In production, we find extension of the frequent forms to novel meanings. This is due, we argue that it's due to the effective frequency on accessibility. How do we know this? We have a 2AFC task that replicates or has the same processing direction as production, going from meaning to form, but accessibility is leveled by providing the forms to the learners. We see no tendency for frequent forms to be extended to novel meaning. This is informed by work in Pizzoni's lab, where they have studies that shows that if you the effective frequency basically disappears in a limited set of responses, and so that's what the 2AFC task is doing. We have a couple follow-up experiments, just putting these tasks immediately after exposure to make sure that there are no carryover effects that are causing these results. And as you can see, it's replicated here. So form choice, we don't get a preference, and in comprehension, we get entrenchment. Yeah, so I'll go over some theoretical claims that we are making based on this data. We found this comprehension production dissociation where there's an entrenching effective frequency in comprehension, but an extension effective frequency in production. When accessibility differences are between forms, we argue that accessibility differences in production are behind the observed effect. When differences in accessibility are leveled, increasing frequency does not result in a presence of preference for the use of frequent form in the related novel construction. So it's true that comprehension usually guides production throughout learning and brings the two into alignment. That's not always the case. That's the argument here. And whether it does or does not, whether there is this convergence or this convergence doesn't occur, this can determine the trajectory of language change. How? The speaker's extensions and innovative use of a form can be taken up by the listener, if that happens, then the innovative use gets propagated throughout the community. In that case, language change has occurred. It's important to remember that the listener has no access to speaker's beliefs, so I would like to just emphasize this comprehension-production dissociation. So it's true that maybe the speaker has certain beliefs about these form-meaning mappings, but which maybe show up in comprehension, but the listener doesn't have access to those. So what the listener has access to is the use of the speaker's use of those forms. And if they're taken up, then language change occurs. Okay. Diachronically, a form might expand in its range of uses because of its high accessibility during production, rather than frequency causing semantic bleaching, which is an argument that has been made by Joan Bybee. She gives this very interesting example. The verb iterate becomes reiterate and becomes reiterate again. So her account is that reiterate is bleached of its meanings, and so the explanation here is based on habituation. The form fails to gets to the meaning that it's supposed to convey due to high frequency. It has been heard many times, so the listener is basically habituated to it, and it doesn't have the same effect. Our account here, I would like to put this in contrast with this account, is that accessibility of the form again from the meaning of repetition. So by saying iterate or reiterate, the meaning of repetition is activated, but the form again, because it's highly frequent, is very much activated through the repetition, through the meaning of repetition, and so it's in a way involuntarily produced. So it's the difference in the locus of extension in a way. So with Bybee's account claims that is a comprehension-based account in a way that locus of habituation is incomprehension. We argue that this occurs as an extension as a result of accessibility in production. You might have heard people use the word irregardless of instead of regardless. We think that also is explainable by this process where this idea, the meaning of despite and negative meaning is so strongly activated that it automatically produces the form in the beginning of the word, because that's a very highly frequent kind of negative prefix. Okay, and so last point I want to make is that we argue that accessibility-driven extension is not limited to child language acquisition. This is what we show here. This is something that has been pointed out by Lisa Gershkov-Stu and Linda Smith. They attribute this accessibility-driven differences and the resulting extension to a system that is expanding. So the speaker might have a lot of accessibility problem, and we would expect to see phenomena like this in any system that's expanding. We believe that this accessibility-driven extension is inherent to the process of language use. We think that it's important to demonstrate that a mechanism that we are considering as a candidate for language change, a mechanism involved in language change, should be present for adults. as it's mostly adults who are mainly responsible for language change, and their use can get conventionalized into structure. And that's all I have. If you're interested in more details, the paper is out, published in Cognitive Psychology, so you could read it there. Thank you very much.